I'm very happy and honored to open the second seminar of our cycle, Rethinking Psychoanalysis in Central Europe, Interdisciplinary and Transnational Perspectives, organized by CEFRES in Prague, Eur'ORBEM at Sorbonne University, at the Institute of Polish Culture, at the University of Warsaw. And today we will have a unique opportunity to hear lectures by our two guests, Professor Judit Mészáros and Mónika, who I would like to warmly welcome.
Dear colleagues, I'm very happy to take part in this seminar. So we can ask the question, why Ferenczi today? What is his role in the international psychoanalytic movement? How have Ferenci's theoretical and therapeutic initiatives been integrated into our recent knowledge? Let me say something about Ferenci's family background. That background can influence development of his personality and his scientific orientation as well. Ferenczi was born in 1873 into a large, assimilated, liberal-minded Jewish family in the city of Miskolc in Hungary, at that time part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was born the 8th of 11 children. One of them died. So it was a huge family. Just to say something about the period in Hungary, he was born in the same year when Pest and Buda, this is the map, you can see, the two cities at that time, on the two sides of the Danube were integrated and Budapest became into existence. Metaphorically speaking, it is a metaphor that represents very well Ferenci's attitude, who himself was an integrative person. So this is the two sides of Buda and Pest, and this is the Margaret Island, if anyone among you have ever been here. So what you see, it's a piece of document from Ferenci's father's bookstore. Ferenci's father, Baruch Frankel, migrated from Krakow, settled in Miskolc, trained for a career in the book trade, and ran his own bookshop by 1856. His second wife, Rosa Eötvös, was born in the town in Galicia, now in Poland, and brought up in Vienna. As a result of this diverse heritage, the Ferenczi family was multilingual. His father changed the name Frankel to Ferenczi, as you see on this document, to the Hungarian-sounding Ferenczi when Sándor was 6 years old. So it means that Sándor was born as Frankel, Sándor Frankel. And the father wanted to express his loyalty to the country that had accepted them as Jewish refugees at that time. Ferenci's father's bookshop was an intellectual hub. This is the house you see, this one in Miskolc. A place frequented by noted writers, one of which culture, in the strictest sense of the word, permitted the house from their bookshop on the ground floor to their living space above it. So this is the house, and in the ground there was the bookstore, and the family lived on the first floor. Famous poets, writers, and artists would come to the bookstore, sparking Ferenci's interest and contributing to the forming of later friendships. Sándor Ferenczi spoke Hungarian and German as native languages. He studied medicine in Vienna and many others at that time, and continued his medical career in Budapest. When he first met Freud in 1908, he was a young physician at that time, 35 years old, with a great interest in the process of unconscious, semi-conscious, and psychological phenomena. He was a forensic medicine specialist by that time and had published more than 100 publications in medical and literary journals from his age 24. So within 10 years, he had been published so many things, reviews, papers, and case studies. It's just a link between that time and our time, because last week the first volume of the complete works of Sándor Ferenczi, Ferenczi towards Psychoanalysis, pre-analytic papers, was published. This is the first volume of the complete work. So I just wanted to show you that how interesting that I'm speaking about that time. And the first volume had already been published. And now we are working on the English translation too. Ferenczi immediately became a part of, after he met Freud's inner circle, and he had a significant impact of creating and developing the international psychoanalytic movement. Despite emotional strains, Freud and Ferenczi developed a lifelong professional relationship. Probably all of you know the correspondence between them until Ferenci's death. So it's a correspondence between 1908 and 1933. So it's about 35 years. And they exchange more than 1,200 letters. Ferenczi was a liberal-minded, creative, innovative person, and Budapest at that time was open to modernization at the fin de siècle. These characteristics were a good combination to receive new ideas, such as psychoanalysis was. Ferenczi used every possible forum, today we would say media, to advocate for psychoanalysis, whether through medical or literary journals. Among them was Therapy, the medical weekly, as you see, just an example. Also the West, it was a literary journal, was established in the same year when Ferenczi met Freud, so in 1908. And he had public lectures at the Free Universities of Social Sciences. It gears the program. And also for the avant-garde university students at the Galilei Circle. So what is interesting is that in that time, the Galilei Circle was established in 1908. The Free University for social sciences was established in 1909, as I remember well. So at that time, it was a very innovative period, and it was a blossoming period for psychoanalysis in Budapest. Ferenczi created interdisciplinary connections. I would like to emphasize it from the beginning for psychoanalysis, and also founded professional group when he formed the Hungarian Psychoanalytical Society in 1913. The various professions represented by the founding members reflected the early interdisciplinarity of psychoanalytic movement in Budapest, and it was the same in Vienna too. But among the Budapest founding members, there were only 5 people established the Hungarian Psychoanalytical Society, and from the 5, one was Ferenczi. But among them, there was psychiatrist, internist, literary person, and at that time a lawyer. It was Sándor, who later became a medical student. Ferenci's cultural background and liberal spirit drew interest in psychoanalysis from those in the social sciences and arts, specifically anthropology, pedagogy, and literature. Freud was keen to develop this relationship between psychoanalysis and other disciplines, but according to his bitter note from 1914, he said that the hostile indifference of the learned and educated section of the population, Vienna, were not receptive in it, I mean psychoanalysis. So it was a huge difference if we see in the culture. Budapest was receptive and Vienna was rejective. In contrast, psychoanalysis had become integrated into the culture in Budapest. Writer and editor, for example, Ignatius, called psychoanalysis is a new human view, one of which had changed our way of thinking, like Einstein's theory of relativity. So the prestige of psychoanalysis was very high. Psychoanalysis was part of the conversations in the coffee house of Budapest, and even played a role in a folk song parody. What you see, this is a New York coffee house where Ferenczi and many others, writers, artists, regularly met. And there was a roundtable discussion. And what is interesting, and I would like to share it with you, that, for example, if you think about it, how could it happen that Ferenczi and Freud, sometimes they changed letters on the same day? And this coffee house was close to a train station. So Ferenczi asked somebody, please take this letter to the train station. The letter arrived within 3 hours to Vienna. And in the afternoon, Freud sent back the letter to Budapest. So it's so this is the secret how they could change frequently ideas. So it's a little bit similar to how we use the emails nowadays. So And there is a folk song, and you know when a folk song appears, it represents that the object is integrated into a culture. And this folk song is, with my pretty little instinct, nesting in the trees, I scrub my inhibition clean at Ferenci's. So Ferenczi was integrated not only in the coffee house of Budapest, but the culture of the town at that time. The Fifth International Psychoanalytic Congress was held in Budapest in 1918, and it was the just in the last minute of the war, end of September, so some weeks before the First World War. Freud wrote to Karl Abraham, Budapest is well on its way to become the center of our movement. Ferenczi became, and it was a very important moment, because Ferenczi became elected president of the International Psychoanalytic Association during the Congress. It was, by the way, the last Congress Freud take part in. And the primary topic of the scientific meeting was war neurosis. Ferenczi served as an army physician in the First World War, and based on his experiences with traumatized soldiers, elaborated upon the psychoanalytic theory that explained the etiology of war neurosis at the Congress. Presentation of war neurosis convinced Austro-Hungarian high-ranked officers there to recommend psychoanalysis at military hospitals treating war trauma. Even if it remained, unfortunately, a plan, because it couldn't realize because of the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of the war, but it was the first time that psychoanalysis had shown to be able to move beyond individual psychoanalyst offices and serve the broader society. I think it's very, it was very unusual at that time. During the Congress, Antal Freund, some of you meet his name as Anton von Freund, offered a huge donation. Nowadays, we would say that $500,000 for psychoanalysis, for establishing psychoanalytic publishing house and polyclinic in Budapest. As I mentioned, Ferenczi had lectures on psychoanalysis for the Galilei Circle. This circle had been established by university students who were open to new ideas. And this influenced medical students to promote the inclusion of psychoanalysis in their training. However, the conservative university senate rejected their proposal in 1918, but at the beginning of the country's 4-month Soviet Republic period in the following year, in 1919, a time of revolutionary innovations, the proposal was approved. So it was in Budapest that an independent department of psychoanalysis was established as part of a medical training in 1919. Ferenczi was the first professor of psychoanalysis at the Medical Faculty of Budapest University, a success not dreamed before, as Freud wrote to Ernst Jones. This also demonstrates that psychoanalysis was capable of establishing itself among academic disciplines. So all of this happened in this year. As you see, within 10 years, psychoanalysis built a strong position in Hungary, but because of the turbulent, this is the nomination of Ferenczi as a professor at the Budapest University. The potential for Budapest playing a central role was lost. When I mentioned that it was a turbulent years in the history of Hungary, you can see how many fundamental revolutions and transformation in the society had happened at that time. First of all, the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed at the end of the war. Soon after it, a revolution, and is a so-called Eastern Revolution, was, and after it, the first Hungarian Republic was established, but was unable to live for a longer period. And the Soviet Republic came out for 3.5 months, and the reaction of it was the White Terror from the 1919. And during this period, Ferenczi was dismissed from his post as head of department because the nomination, he became the nomination during the Soviet Republic period. Unfortunately, it happened. But the most painful situation was that psychoanalysis lost its position within the university curriculum. Ferenczi resigned as president of the International Psychoanalytic Association. By the way, it was a pushy moment by Ernst Jones. So Ernst Jones wanted to be the president, the next president of the IPA, and asked Ferenczi to resign because of the new political and societal events. But it was only a good excuse. So Psychoanalytic Publishing House and the library, because of the inflation, were established in Vienna. The political retribution and the flame of anti-Semitism brought two waves of emigration from Hungary. The first emigration wave began in 1919 and was ended within 3 years. And the second wave of emigration, so it was the first wave, was the numerus clausus. It means that the close numbers. It meant that only 6% of Jewish students could attend the medical university, and before the members in percentage was approximately 26-27. And the anti-Jewish, and the second wave of immigration was the anti-Jewish legislation passed by the Hungarian parliament in 1938. during the first emigration wave, 1/3 of the Psychoanalytical, the members of the Psychoanalytical Society left the country. And you can see some familiar names here, like Melanie Klein, Sándor Radó, also Margaret Mahler, Michael Balint and his wife, Alice Balint, Franz Alexander, Edith Gyömrői, or Therese Benedek, and also Sándor Loránd, who was the first emigre from the Hungarian psychoanalytic circle, settled in New York with the help of Ferenczi. And I also would like to mention René Spitz, who had a great role understanding the early mother-infant relationship later on. And just I would like to show you these emigration waves, the two emigration waves. What is, I think it's too many names are on the map, so you are unable to follow it, but I would like to show you, this is the first emigration wave with the names, and this is the second one, many names. And what you see, and I would like to pay your attention, the radiation, that the Budapest Psychoanalysis settled in Chicago, Topeka, so it North America, but also Australia, and they established different institutes there, so they were very influential. So they left Europe, and I think it's visible here. And one of them settled first in Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, and from Sri Lanka was Edith Gyömrői, and later on she settled in London. So it's a very interesting map speaking about the emigration of the Budapest School. So, what is the Budapest School? The school represents the group that formed around the spirit of Sándor Ferenczi. It's very interesting because we say Budapest School. By the way, it was the terminology created by Michael Balint in after his emigration, when he settled in London, but the first time he had to go to Manchester because Anne Jones didn't want to see him, and the Budapest psychoanalyst in London. So Jones wanted to keep them far away from London. It's on the one hand understandable. On the other hand, it was a very sad moment. But by the way, so the terminology, the Budapest School created by Balint in 1949. But what does it mean, Budapest School? Because there was no walls, there was no students, and there was no director. So it's very interesting. What does it mean, school? So the school represents the group that formed around the spirit of Sándor Ferenczi, and its members reflect the perspective of this intellectual community. And here is a birthday celebration, Ferenczi's 50th birthday, when you can see some members of the Budapest School. For example, Michael Balint is here, his wife, where is his wife? Alice Balint is here, and Imre Herman István Hollós, and here's Sándor Ferenczi and his wife Gisela, for example. Many of them contributed significantly to modern psychoanalysis. They joined Ferenci's ideas, way of thinking, and contributed by their own clinical and theoretical aspects, and laid the groundwork for the application of understanding from psychoanalysis in a broader social context. Let's see now Ferenci's main contribution to theory and practice. How has Ferenci's theoretical and therapeutic innovation enriched psychoanalysis, and how others could join these ideas? Let's see now the main fields that became the pillars of our recent knowledge. Those main sources which can be connected to Ferenczi and the Budapest psychoanalysts. Let's see contributions step by step. For example, countertransference, and after is psychoanalytic psychosomatics, and the new trauma theory Ferenczi introduced, or facilitated interdisciplinary links of psychoanalysis, and also the idea that speaking about the development of personality and the different disorders, Ferenczi suggested to go down, it is his terminology, go down to the mother. You can find it in the clinical diary. It means that it is important to see what's going on in the early mother-child relationship, because this is basically important. So let's see something about countertransference. That was the birth of the two-person psychology at that time. What Ferenczi thought that it's important to create a reflective transversal relationship, not only in the therapeutic relationship, but first time between the parents and the child. And in 1908, he urged that parents avoid the falseness of omnipotence, which later becomes a source of disappointment for children. He saw that optimal child rearing principle as no more repression than necessary. Parents can thus provide optimal freedom for the child's development. And this spirit can be found in the ideas of Margaret Mahler, if you remember the optimal individuation and separation process, for example, or we can find it Winnicott's aptly terms, the good enough mother, or the terminology Balint set up, the basic fault. Ferenczi saw it's essential to an appropriate therapeutic relationship that the therapist's interventions be emotionally credible as well. This is why he suggested integrating countertransference in the therapeutic process, and this happened almost a decade after Freud had underscored that the emergence of countertransference should be avoided in psychoanalysis. And this is a very charming caricature. One of our colleagues, Tihamér Bakó, who tried to show was the difference between the Freudian atmosphere during the process and the atmosphere Ferenczi suggested to work together with the transference, counter-transference relationship, and to share not only our ideas, but also our emotional feelings also to the patient. So Freud wanted to teach the patient how the patient could think about the unconscious process, and Ferenczi created discussion between the unconscious process of the therapist and the patient too. So I just would like to share you Ferenczi quotation that the analyst has to let the patient's free association play upon him. Simultaneously, he lets his own fantasy get to work with the association material. So from time to time, he compares the new connections that arise with the earlier results from the analysis. So what Ferenczi thought is important, the mutual reflective relationship, authentic communications, because insincere communication facilitates repetition of the previous traumatic experiences, as we would say today, that false reflections result in false self-objects. So psychoanalysis became a system of multi-directional process. As Heunel mentioned, the relationship-based process. Paul Rosen, I think that many of you knew him, and he mentioned that psychoanalysis in Budapest was a two-way street process. Rickman terminology is the two-body psychology, and after the two-body psychology, we speak about two-person psychology. So it is visible how a new discourse has developed in Budapest from the beginning of the 1920s. So let's see something about the early object relationship, the primary object love. Ferenczi was speaking about passive object love. Alice Balint and Michael Balint mentioned it as archaic relationship or primary love. And what is important that Ferenczi called this state passive object love, and Ferenczi was referring the problem of a deficit in the early relationship, and as he discussed it in his paper, The Unwelcome Child. He noted that adult circulatory disorders and asthmatic diseases stem from the mother's early emotional rejection of the infant, whether prenatal or postpartum. And it's a quotation: children who are received in a harsh and unloving way die easily and willingly, or if they escape this fate, they retain a sort of pessimism and aversions to live. And Winnicott later made a similar observation. It's a quotation: "A baby can be fed without love, but loveless or impersonal management cannot succeed in producing a new autonomous human child." And Ferenczi sensed the significance of the mother-infant relationship early on in the clinical diary when he mentioned that we must probe deep, right down to the mother. And Clara Thompson, one of Ferenci's American analysts, yes, wrote these lines. Ferenczi also believed that love is as essential to a child healthy growth as food. With it, the child feels secure and has confidence in himself. Without it, he becomes neurotically ill, often dies because of lack of love. Today, other analysts, notably Fromm and Sullivan, have presented similar ideas, but I believe Ferenczi was quite alone in Europe around 1926 in this type of thinking. And probably you know that Clara Thompson was one of Ferenci's analysts from the United States. Beyond Ferenczi and Bálint, Imre Hermann was another Budapest representative of the early relationship. He stressed that the primary mother-infant relationship as a mother-child unit or a dual unit become of an instinctual desire for physical contact, or as he termed it, as clinging instinct. The common denominator among the Budapest analysts was that they recognized the importance of the early mother-infant relationship, as Bowlby said it in 1958. From the outset, Ferenczi and Bálint viewed it in the term of object relations, while Hermann said it was based on drive. The infant only comes in contact with his or her environmental later. So I just would like to underline it because speaking about the Budapest psychoanalysts, they set up the theoretical idea of secondary narcissism. Not the primary, as it was Freud and interestingly later Klein joined to Freud ideas, the primary narcissism. But the Budapest analyst said that narcissism is a consequence of the unsatisfied early mother-infant relationship. That is, if I'm not loved sufficiently by the world, not given enough gratification, I must love and gratify myself. The clinical observable narcissism is, therefore, always a protection against a bad or only reluctant object. So I think I wanted to pick these ideas, and in the contrast to Kleinian approach, Bálint maintained that the infant is not primarily narcissistic or not a little creature filled with early sadistic and aggressive drives. The infant turns out that way if the social environment doesn't love it enough or doesn't satisfy it properly. So it's only a list. I would like to show you how many people from the Budapest psychoanalyst recognized the importance of the early mother-infant relationship. Among them, for example, René Spitz, who was speaking about the hospitalization syndrome, probably you know it, and he set up this terminology in 1945, of course, after his emigration from Budapest to Paris and from Paris to the United States. And of course, among the others, Fairbairn, John Bowlby, and nowadays Fonagy, but originally he also a Hungarian, or I mean that Hungarian origin, the family was a Hungarian origin, so our pronunciation is Fonagy and not Fonagy, but it's interesting that he also his research, it's an outstanding research. We can put his researches into that line. And now I would like to say something, the early psychoanalytic psychosomatics. Ferenczi, Levy the internist, I just would like to mention that Levy was the family doctor of Freud and the Freud family, and also Ferenczi and the Ferenczi family. And this small group joined to this small group joined to Michael Balin before his emigration. And I also just would like to mention the name George Grodek. And it's a beautiful statement by Grodek. The disease itself is a secret confession, so that we can find shelter from the adversities of life. Every early death is a suicide. And I mentioned this psychosomatic part. I mentioned that the unwelcome child syndrome is also could develop as a psychosomatic illness. And what is interesting for me when I made the research in this field, that Ferenczi very early, in the early 20s, he had a lecture in Košice Medical Society to the family practitioners. So it was not Balin the first who tried to involve family practitioners into the circles of psychoanalytic way of thinking. So Košice now belong to Slovakia, and this line began in Budapest, continued when Balin settled in London and created his very famous group, the so-called Balin groups. And there is a result of this research were published in his book, The Doctor, the Patient, and the Illness. And I think I would finish because, so I just would like to mention another field. This is the paradigm shift in the trauma theory, how Ferenczi created a new idea in his Confusion of Tongues between adult and the child, and how important was his experiences, and it was the last drop. So it was a conflict between. It created a conflict between Freud and Ferenczi, because Ferenczi created a really new paradigma shift in the trauma theory, and Freud was very upset when Ferenczi declared that every that the background of every neurotic pathological phenomena, there is some kind of real traumatic event. So the trauma is not a fantasy, the trauma based on real events. And what is important that in the confusion of tongue, Ferenczi said that there is a subjective truth, that our experiences is also truth for us. So the therapist role is not to try to find the objectivity in the personal experiences. So we can accept the experience as it had happened, and on the basic on these experiences, we have to treat the patient. So it was true that Freud was searching for objective truths, but Ferenczi accepted the subjective truths. And the analyst accepts the experience as psychic reality and doesn't question their truth content. And what I also just would like to add, that how important was that Ferenczi realized that trauma is not an event, trauma is a process. And in the process, there is the traumatized person and the aggressor, so the victim and the aggressor. And on the part of the aggressor, there are different ego defense mechanisms. And on the part of the victim, there are also different ego defense mechanisms. And among them was for example, the identification with the aggressor, as you know very well, and it became well known as Stockholm Syndrome after 40 years when Ferenczi discovered it. I just would like to pay attention of one of Ferenci's idea that how important is the third person after the traumatic situation. The third person means that somebody who is able to listen of the traumatized person and who is able to create a trustworthy relationship with the traumatized person as soon as it is possible soon after the trauma. And if there is somebody, the consequence of the immediate help and solidarity is unbelievable important, because after it there is no silence. I'm speaking about the consequence of the traumatized person's intrapsychic feelings, that there is no somebody whom they are able to share the traumatic experiences, not only the sexual abuses, but other traumas, physical traumas, and so on, mainly if it's happening in a family circle. So there is no silence, no loneliness, no isolation, no secret, and no taboo. And this picture is 9/11, when the immediate solidarity was there. just few words about Ferenczi as an innovator who energized the whole psychoanalytic movement. He was the person who suggested to organize the International Psychoanalytical Association. It was Ferenci's idea. And he established the Hungarian Psychoanalytical Society, and it was his idea, the International Journal of Psychoanalysis, and also the first psychoanalytic department in the medical school. By the way, the second psychoanalytic department in the medical school could set up by another Hungarian. It was Radó at the Columbia University in New York. But between the two, there was 25 years. It's not very well known that it was Ferenczi who suggested to establish the IPA. But let's see his own words. You know, perhaps, that I was originally inclined to lay down certain rules of behavior in addition to free association. Experience later taught me that one should never order or forbid any changes of behavior. It is in the patient himself who must. It's before. I'm sorry. It just an example about Ferenci's how transparent he was, and he really show us that it's not a problem if we do any kind of mistake. It has a possibility to say. So we are human beings. What the problematic issue is when we do not accept us as a human being, and we would like to create the vision that we are without mistakes and so on. Just an innovation of the Budapest psychoanalyst. There is a list of the emigrants. It's a huge list, but what you see that many of them became the member of the New York, the Chicago, and the Topeka Psychoanalytic Institute, and many of them became the leader of this institute. Speaking about Radó, who set up the Berlin Psychoanalytic Institute model in New York, and also who created the psychoanalytic clinic for training and research at the Columbia in 1945. Alexander, who established the Chicago Institute for Psychoanalysis, and not speaking about David Rappaport, who was originally a mathematician and later became a psychoanalyst, and he was very interested in research studies, and he used his mathematician background very well, and he had enormous impact on clinical psychology research between 1940 and 1960, and he was who created the possibility to set up the diagnostic test in the psychiatric clinics throughout United States. And there is also somebody, Clara Lazar-Garreau, who set up Australian Psychoanalytic Society in Melbourne. And let's see, Sándor, Loránd, Robert Bach, Endre Pető became elected presidents of the New York Psychoanalytic Society. Probably you know that Michael Balint was the president of the British Psychoanalytic Association, and I think it's important because their spirit, their ideas appeared in the training system in their institutes. And now you see the Budapest Psychoanalytic family tree, Ferenczi, how many people were in analysis with him. Of course, at that time, analysis lasted several months, so it was not as long as nowadays. But I think it shows the influence of Ferenczi and the Budapest Psychoanalysis, the Budapest school. And just the last idea that unfortunately John's rivalry and false rumor caused Cold War in the reception of Ferenczi after his death, and it lasted among 4 decades, so it lasted for a long time. And the rumor was that Ferenczi became mad, became paranoid, and all that paranoia infiltrated his latest studies. And of course, the spread of fascism that shocked the entire psychoanalytic community in the Second World War and after it. The Soviet ideology annihilated the Eastern European psychoanalytic societies. And the missing link to Ferenczi has been noticed again by the peers from the 1980s. And this is the only photo we have on Ferenczi in the Ferenczi in his original villa, the Ferenczi house. And what is nice that, and it's funny also, if I may say such a thing, that Ferenczi was not a narcissistic person at all. He was the last, I think, in the psychoanalytic movement. What is very funny, that you see Ferenczi himself and the bust on him, and also on the wall, portrait of him. So Ferenczi here and everywhere in this moment, and this beautiful bust was made Oscar Niemann, originally Neumann, changed the name when he settled in London and became a very well-known, famous sculptor. Unfortunately, the bust disappeared, so we do not know the fate of it. So thank you for your attention. And sorry, I was a little bit longer than I planned it to be.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you a lot for this wonderful lecture, very rich. And I think we really could see the complexity of and richness of Hungarian psychoanalysis. So thank you. And now I will leave the floor for Mónika, and later we will have the questions.
So thank you very much, Agnes, for the invitation and for the opportunity to share here my thoughts. Now I try to share my presentation. Can now you see? Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see it. It's perfect.
So, oh, but I cannot see. That's great. Okay, then. So, I will continue from the moment when Professor Mészáros finished it, and I will refer her lecture in many ways. I would like to start my presentation about the society, that the Sándor Ferenczi Society was founded in 1988, a year after an exhibition organized on the history of the Budapest school, and the year before the re-establishment of the Hungarian Psychoanalytical Society after its dissolution in 1949. The activities of the society embraces the theory and the therapeutic practice of psychoanalysis, included the cultural amendment of the psychoanalysis. Here in this slide, you can see our goals and the activities through which we realize these goals. Our main goal are to collect, preserve, make available the heritage of the Budapest School of Psychoanalysis, and the second one, providing forums for scientific and interdisciplinary discussion. So I was talking about our two main goals, as you can see, and I am going to speak about the Ferenczi House with a special regard to the archives in it and the art and psychoanalysis lecture and discussion series. You can see here highlighted these two topics I would like to speak about. So let's see the Ferenczi house, the story of the Ferenczi house. Ferenczi bought a spacious, elegant villa in Naphegy in 1913. He happily shared the news with his friend Georg Rodek, and you can see the beautiful Seastrolis villa on the picture, and the letter from Ferenczi to Rodek. Now for real news, we have bought a villa consisting of 2 floors with garden over the Offner Hill, means Sun Hill, first district, Listnyai Strasse, Street 11, and we will be moving in toward the end of this month. It was a good buy for approximately 7,000 marks. I look forward to getting fresh air and sun, which I greatly missed here. So what did the villa mean for Ferenczi? First of all, it meant a sunny own villa, as he lived in the 7th district of Budapest before moving to the sunny Naphegy, which is a very lively but crowded and noisy place. And the apartment where the couple lived was owned by his wife Gisela's family. Sadly, Ferenczi could spend here only 3 years as he died. And then came the storms of the history. Gisela sold the house and the villa was divided to smaller apartments in the era of socialism. In 19 1985, the reviving psychoanalytical community placed a memorial plate there, as you can see here. And at the beginning of the 2000s, there was an opportunity to rent an apartment in the villa, which was exactly the former office of Ferenczi. Later, the owner of the apartment could be persuaded to sell it for the society. Then started the so-called Ferenczi House project. In 2006, people being enthusiastic toward the Ferenczi heritage in a frame of an international cooperation started to run a big fundraising campaign for purchasing this rented apartment. In 2008, the Sándor Ferenczi Society received the APA's Mary Sigourney Award for its outstanding contribution on the field of psychoanalysis. This prize of the award, the society devoted to purchase the Ferenczi House. To feel the importance of this award, I can mention some institutes who also received it. The Menninger Clinic, Topeka Institute for Psychoanalysis, the Library of Contracts, and the Freud Collection and the Anna Freud Center, etc. Another step was that in 2010, Franco Borgogno, a prominent Italian Ferenczi researcher, received the Mary Sigourney Award as an individual and generously donated half of the price to purchase the house. I mean the apartment. Thanks to the donation of 19 institutes and 253 individuals and the price of the Mary Sigourney Award, it became possible to purchase the apartment in the Ferenczi Villa. The Sándor Ferenczi Society, together with the International Ferenczi Fund, finally purchased the apartment in 2011 May. Then in September, the Ferenczi community celebrated together the opening of the International Ferenczi Center. As you can see, the milestones of this Ferenczi project on the pictures. So let's see the functions of the Ferenczi House today. Ferenczi House is a special interpersonal space. I think no one can express better than the most enthusiastic contributor, Judit Mészáros, what the house means for today's generation. In her article, the Ferenczi House is a space for identity formation. She utilizing Pierre Nora's theoretical frames, and she wrote, "House is an example of lieu de mémoire, size the memory, where memory crystallizes and where memory takes root in concrete, in spaces, gestures, images, and objects. As something happening in the present, as something experienced among individuals and groups, memory is a live attachment." And according to Pierre Nora, she cites, the passage from memory to history has required social group, including professional community, to redefine its identity through the revitalization of its own history. So, what are the functions of the house today? It hosts the archive of the Budapest School, which includes manuscripts, letters, certificates, personal documents, dedicated books, photos, and relics. The archive contains more than 10,000 pages of documents. The project of its digitalization is in progress, but some of the pieces can they are available through our homepage. So the Ferenczi House also serves educational purposes, hosts lectures, seminars, and other professional events. And as a visitor center, it receives visitors from more than 20 countries so far. So, whose legacy, first of all about the archive, whose legacy can be found in the archive? The collection is included the legacy of first and second generation analysts. Judit Mészáros told a lot about them and story, immigrations, and other things about them. Some of them remained in Hungary despite of the persecutions. They suffer from different political system and the lack of supportive environment during the socialism, and some of them immigrated. You can see the list of the analysts whose legacy are in the archive. And here on the picture, you can see the boxes in which we restore the documents. Part of the legacy returned from abroad in a quite an arbitrary way, because I am a literary historian. I would like to highlight Edith Gyömrői's legacies as an example. Edith Gyömrői niece to István Holos was close friend to Ferenczi, and István Holos was one of the founder of the Hungarian Psychoanalytical Society. Gyömrői is well known in Hungary for being the analyst of one of the most significant Hungarian poets, Attila József, and to whom the poet fell in love and to whom he wrote beautiful love poems. And these love poems is the part of our curricula in the basic educational system. So he's really, really well known to anybody in Hungary. So her legacy, Gyömrői's legacy, returned from England, and a part of it donated to the Sándor Ferenczi Society and can be found here in our archive. I guess next time Anna Borbos will tell more about Gyömrői's extremely talented character and her life and the world full of adventures and challenges. Now let's see some pieces from the archive. The first one is a friendly postcard sent by the Holos family, sent by the Ferenczi couple to the Holos family. From a holiday, and the text of the card is quite simple. It sounds like, "Dear Holos family, what can I write to this small piece of card, etc. Sándor Ferenczi and Gisela Edith, his wife Gisela Edith. I send my greetings from 2,500 meters above the sea level, Mrs. Sándor Ferenczi." And the second one is a certificate to Edith Gyömrői from the Hungarian Psychoanalytical Society in 1938, which was issued right before she left the country for Sri Lanka, Ceylon. You can remember the map Professor Mészáros showed you with a large radiation to Sri Lanka. So, and the third one is the medical diploma of Lajos Lévy, a family doctor of the Freud family, Freud and the Ferenczi family, and he's also one of the founder of the Hungarian Analytical Society. So, as I mentioned, to finish the topic of the archive, as I mentioned, the Ferenczi House also operates as an educational center. Here you can see a picture of the participants of the seminar held for the psychotherapists came from Lviv. It's taken 216, and the seminar was held by Judit, Mészáros, and János Harmatta, psychiatrist, board member of our society. And to switch to the other function, the next function, the houses also serve as a visitor center. It has an exhibition area. You can see the beautiful hand-woven carpet of Edith Gyömrői. She made it in Sri Lanka, and some photos on the wall of the member of the Budapest school when the Budapest school was in the real was flourishing between the 1920s and 1930s. So here, the members of the society provide special interactive guidance to the visitors, which is in the spirit of Ferenczi, actually a fruitful dialogue between the visitor and the guide. Here we can see a nice visitor, familiar to us now, and her note left in the visitor's book. Many, many thanks for the unique opportunity to visit and do the research in the Ferenczi house written by Agnieszka. And I would like to show you another note, as these words, I think, capture very well the living character of the Ferenczi house as a site of memory. Ferenczi spirit lives in all of us and in psychoanalysis. This Mexican woman is grateful to all the people who work hard and with passion to keep his ideas alive. Irayetsin Hernandez from Mexico. And Irayetsin became the member of our society in Budapest. She's a great fan of the Hungarian culture. So let's switch to the next topic, the next big function of our society, to establish forum for interdisciplinary dialogues. One of this forum is the art and psychoanalysis, and I am going to speak about this lecture and discussion series. Let's start about the interdisciplinarity of the importance of interdisciplinarity in Ferenczi's life. Between the portraits of Robert Barány, an outstanding painter, we can read Ferenczi's confession about the importance in his identity formation. Two of his friends, Ignotus, a literary person, he was the chief editor of the Nyugat, the West. Judit Mészáros showed the forums where Ferenczi spread the psychoanalytical ideas, and this was the literary journal where he so-called advertised the psychoanalytical thoughts, published articles, or even on literary topics. I can mention one of his articles Anatole France as psychoanalyst, Anatole France as analyst. So back to this slide, this confession. Ferenczi said that I could test value of my ideas after I became convinced that what you like, he means ignotus, what you liked couldn't be completely bad, and what you frowned upon must have had something defect. Thus, you and Robert Berain, a young painter, friend of ours, were like the genuine institution for making my exclusion from societies of the university and academic of sciences together with other societies easily bearable. This is a quote from Ignotus, the Understanding. And I think this confession captures the very nature of interdisciplinarity. So now I'm going to tell something about our lecture and discussion series, Art and Psychoanalysis. In the spirit of the Ferencian tradition, the Sándor Ferenczi Society has been running a lecture and discussion series since 10 years. Continuously. It is a common joint program with the Attila József Society and the Petőfi Literary Museum. It is hosted by the Petőfi Literary Museum, which is one of the most prominent literary institutes in Hungary. Every event consists of a lecture and a discussion open to the public. The topics are varied. Every lecture is welcome, which is origin, creative, and deals with the connection of art and psychoanalysis, or interprets an art piece or cultural or social phenomenon with the help of psychoanalytical theories. It is an educational series, open for the public. It is addressed to the wider educated lay audience, but the lectures always convey scientific values as well. The events are unique experience as the text illustrates the lectures are performed by artists, mainly actors. It is also important that the events are free for the public. So actually they are the donations of the lecturers and the artists. So let's see some examples of these lectures. First, I would like to mention a lecture which is on art and literature. The participants, literary historian, member of the Attila József Society, and the social psychologist Ferenczi, who was also the member of the József Attila Society and one of the founder.
Mónika, we cannot hear you. Okay.
2 years ago. So this was a roundtable, and Attila József and the psychoanalysis. Why is it important? Attila József is one of the most prominent Hungarian poets and the most famous patient of the Hungarian psychoanalysis as well. Among others, he was analyzed by Edith Gyömrői and Robert Bach. And his poesy not only is deeply affected by the psychoanalytic thoughts, but Attila József as a thinker wrote serious papers on psychoanalysis. Mainly he tried to harmonize, reconciliate the views of Marxism and psychoanalysis. Here we can we can read a quote of his poem written for the 8th birthday of Freud. This is a very beautiful poem, as I guess, and it captures the thalassal regression somehow, and love as a prototype of the mother-child relationship, and the aggression and the connection between the aggression and the love. So that which your heart this uses. Children all of the living yearn for our mother's arm, lovemaking or death-giving, to vest, to take up arms. So let's see the next example. This was a lecture in which the fine arts, painting, and psychoanalysis connected. The lecturer was Antal Bokai, a literary historian, and the students in the doctoral school of psychology, and it was Salvador Dali, and it was about Salvador Dali and the theory of paranoid critic method in painting. So I think it just speaks for itself. It was very interesting because they analyzed this the painting I cannot recall the title of the painting. Okay. But they analyzed it in the light of the light of the theory of Dali, and they also mentioned and presented the connection between the Dali and Freud, and how Freud evaluated Dali's art and so on, the complex connection between the surrealism and the psychoanalysis. And let's see another example about film that was our last event, where the participants were a psychoanalyst and a film criticist. And this event was moderated by the psychologists. And I can say that film is an extremely popular in this series. And this time the participants discussed about the real therapeutic experience and the possibilities and barriers to represent this experience and the therapeutic phenomenon by the film. And it was richly illustrated by very well-known films, for example, by Woody Allen, the Deconstructing Harry, and so on. And it was very funny and deep in the same time. And I would like to mention one more, the next one, which will be about the connection of art and philosophy. And the lecturer will be mathematicians who is going to talk about the genius of János Bolyai, interpreted by the help of Hermann's theory and evaluated from the perspective of pneumatology. So quite a complex and excited topic, I guess. So yeah, Johannes or János Bolyai was a Hungarian mathematician who developed the absolute geometry in the same time with another mathematicians. Oh, sorry, I cannot recall. Very famous. Oh, yeah. He invented the absolute geometry and geometry that includes both Euclidean geometry and the hyperbolic geometry. His life and work was analyzed by Imre Hermann in the perspective of his psychology of thinking. And this analysis of Hermann will be evaluated a view of philosophy called pneumatology. So I look forward, excited how will be this event. So I intended to share these things, and thank you for the attention. And we are looking forward to meeting you in the Ferenczi hours.
Okay, great. Thank you a lot for your presentation. It was really informative, and I think that it was also amazing to to start with the history, the beginnings of psychoanalysis, the transfer of psychoanalysis in Hungary, and then to see how the legacy of Ferenczi and the Budapest school is today in contemporary Hungarian culture. So thank you for showing us how it lives today. And now I will have some questions to you, and I think that I will start with Professor Mészáros, and I would like to ask you about the pre-analytic phase in Ferenci's scientific activity. You mentioned that recently you published the first, edited the first volume of Hungarian edition of Ferenci's writings, and you also said that Ferenczi was very prolific in this period before he met Freud. So I was wondering, could you tell us more about the character of Ferenci's interest in this early period? What subjects did he develop at that time? And also, do you see any relationship between the early phase of his scientific development and the late phase, so in the early 30s?
Oh, it's a very complex question, and I try to summarize something. So Ferenczi was interested in psychological phenomena at that time, even though he was unable to deal with it from the beginning. And what is interesting, for example, that he began his activity as a medical doctor as the prostitute department, and he was absolutely sad about it, and he wanted to do something, what was his pleasure at that time. And probably you know that at that time the Spiritism and the activities of mediums was very interesting in all over the world. So the movement of Spiritism came from the United States, And in Europe, there were many seances. And there was a huge debate, pro and contra. For example, is it a real, real phenomena, or it's just fantasies, and so on and so on. So what is important, and what I would like to emphasize, that from the beginning, Ferenczi tried to create a position in the middle. And his suggestion was that sit down to the table and let's see what's going on. It was his suggestion to make an experiment because, and I tried to quote it, because as I think there is some truth in it, even though there is not an objective but subjective truth. So this kind of approach of a phenomena represents not only the young Ferenci's habit, but also we can understand why he was ready to psychoanalysis when he met Freud immediately. So he prepared himself toward that direction. And this first paper was published 1 year before the fin de siècle, so in 1899. So I think, so this is one interest. And another interest that as a medical doctor, he didn't want to integrate himself in the order of autocracy. So he wanted to keep the open-mindedness and create experiments, and also create a dialogue between the patient and the medical doctor. And he believed at that time, it was very rare, it's like rare bird, that doctor and patient created a discussion about the problems of the somatic problems. So he believed that the doctor has to treat the whole person, and the somatic symptom represents something what is more than somatic phenomena in somebody's body. So this is one. And another that was for me very, very interesting, that even though Ferenczi was very young at that time, 24, when he published his first paper, and this 10 years period, the pre-analytic period, represent his 1/3 activities in his life. So it is a huge body in his activity. And even though he was very young, but in that period, he cited more than 250 colleagues, philosophers, people from studies of human parts of the science, and the natural scientists, and medical fields and so on and so on. So Ferenczi had a very huge horizon, and I think it somehow predestinated him not only to link to psychoanalysis, but also to integrate interdisciplinary knowledge into psychoanalysis itself. So.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think that his openness in theory and in practice was really remarkable. So my second question will relate to the later history of psychoanalysis in Hungary. So I would like to ask you also about the situation of the psychoanalytic movement and the Budapest School of Psychoanalysis shortly after the Second World War, because you extensively talked about the two waves of emigration, and I was wondering about the psychoanalysts who stayed in Budapest. So what was their relationship, for example, with other Central European psychoanalysts? Did they establish any relationship with, for example, Czechoslovakian psychoanalysts, or maybe with the Austrian? What was their relationship with the Western psychoanalysts? You said about Ernest Jones and the conflict between himself and Ferenczi. So what was the situation of this movement, these people who decided or who just stayed in Budapest after 1945?
Oh,
just, you know.
Okay, so just few words. As I mentioned, a lot of people left Hungary, and those who survived and remain in Hungary, only 17 psychoanalysts and candidates. 17, that's it, no more. So it's a very small circle. And they believed immediately after the finishing the war that they could continue. And the interesting is that the Hungarian society was the only one in Europe that kept the continuity to be the member of the IPA despite of the war situation. It's a long story why who was able. So because of Holus was the president, who was also a Jew with a Jewish background, and somebody immediately after the occupation of Hungary in the last minute of the war. I'm speaking of 1944, March 1944, but somebody who had not have a Jewish origin replaced him in the presidency. So it was a very beautiful moment at that time. But oh my God. Just a minute, because my patient, I asked him to come later. So, and
yes, so
if you let.
I just,
I would like to add something to this story, your question.
Okay,
that
of course.
The Hungarian Psychoanalytical Society dissolved itself in 1949. And then these survivors did the therapeutic practice under the ground, you know, because of the social. That it's somehow also an answer to your question. And I referred that in 1985. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mónika. So, but soon after it, they realized that the communist regime not only didn't accept psychoanalysis, but began to speak about that the home science of imperialism. So it was absolutely forbidden to continue the psychoanalytic practice. And it was also interesting that the leader of the Psychoanalytic Society at that time joined to the Communist Party. So it was a totally contradiction to be the president of the Hungarian Psychoanalytic Society and at the same time to be the member of the Communist Party. I'm speaking about, for example, Imre Hermann. So the society had to dissolve, and the whole activity if they could continue, that had happened underground. So, and what I also would like to mention that women kept alive the light of psychoanalysis at that time. I wrote about it, why women and not men, because mainly the men, they were medical doctors, and they could find another job as a medical doctors, not existing as psychoanalysts. And women who had a husband who earned money, so in a secret way, they could continue the psychoanalytic practice at home, you know, hiding them in their home, in their house. And it lasted for about 4 decades, 4 decades, so almost 40 years. Just a moment, I have to speak with my patients who came earlier.
Yes, so I will only add that Professor Mészáros said 17 people as a small circle, and I was thinking about the Polish case where after the Second World War there was no one left, you know, from the earlier because we didn't have in Poland the school, the formal school. Nevertheless, there were a lot of people very interested in who knew Freud also through Jekyll's mostly, and you know there were after the war there was no one. It was in 1950s there was new wave of psychoanalysts who did not know anyone from the period pre-war. So this is also interesting in comparison. And I will have, while we're waiting, I will have the third and the last question to you, Mónika. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll wait. Or maybe I can ask you now and we will.
So that was the situation. So underground, they worked underground. Some of them, only really some of them. So five or six of them, and the situation after Stalin's death and after the 56 revolution in Hungary, after it a little bit became more soft, political speaking. So the new seminars began in the middle of the 60s. but it really was a lost. Those who left Hungary, they lost their language, their friends, but they had a new vision to be able to live in a more democratic countries. And they really fertilized modern psychoanalysis. And those who remained in Hungary, they lost their friends and colleagues and their past also, without the hope that they could continue their psychoanalytic activities. So, but comparing us with what had happened in Czechoslovakia or the former Yugoslavia, I think our adventure was the Budapest School and Ferenczi before the Second World War. So there was the route, but it was very difficult to find back to this kind of route. So it's almost eliminated. So the new generation had to recover those things that was absolutely vivid before the Second World War in the Budapest culture and the Budapest psychotherapeutic activities.
Thank you. I think that this, but it is still very fascinating how today the psychoanalysis Hungary is revived and lives. It's just amazing. Okay, so I see one raised hand.
Hello. Sorry, I have to go in 2 minutes, but I would like to thank the organizers for a very interesting seminar, and both speakers say much regards to Judit, because we are with Roman from Czech Psychoanalytic Society, and we spoke to each other in Prague. When
just a minute, I come back, but I have to say my patient to sit down now.
Okay, there is some unrest in the second room, but I have a question for Judit, but it will be just raising question, and then I really
yes, I'm here.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, and when we had a meeting about clinical diary, you had presentation. I was just wondering, my question, which I will have to dream about, because I have to really go. What do you think about the rumor about Ferenczi, that it was quite popular in the Analytic Society, and whether it was also related to something Ferenczi, some his thoughts that were difficult to accept or contain. I was wondering why this rumor was so actually prevalent for influential, but thank you again, because really I have to go now. Thanks a lot.
So my brief answer is that Jones was in a deep rivalry with Ferenczi, because Freud really loved Ferenczi, so it was a very close relationship between them. And Jones wanted to be the best or more influential son of Freud. And by the way, Ferenczi analyzed Jones, and also Ferenczi paid Jones attention that they stopped and Jones should continue it. So it was a difficult relationship. So, and yes, and it was Jones' rivalry and enviness, so speaking about the personal background. But speaking about the rumor, Freud was not innocent at all. because Freud saw that Ferenczi lost Freud saw that Ferenczi wanted to treat everybody. And Freud saw that it's a mission impossible. And Ferenczi went beyond to Freud trauma theory. So Freud didn't want to hear about it. The problematic issue was the war, the Second World War. And for example, some of people from the Budapest school wanted to protect Ferenczi and defend him. But listen, Balint tried to do it in London, but Balint was an émigré, and he was received by the Psychoanalytic Society in London, which society's president was Jones. So Balint tried to do what he could, but he was not free at all.
Sure. Thank you very much, really. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. So I think we should.
We need to finish. So thank you a lot for your wonderful lectures. I think we all learned a lot, and thank you for accepting the invitation and to be with us online today.
Thank you very much for your invitation to take part in this series. And I think it's very useful, and we see the future